In the last few years, fraud in cyber world has escalated from something that was heard about occasionally and was usually dealt by experts to something that is now mentioned in casual conversations. And even laypersons and consumers are worried about it. What is really disconcerting is the fact that the awareness was brought about by unprecedented increase in volume, frequency, and the sophistication of fraud attacks. Bad actors are increasingly harnessing advanced technologies to attack more, pivot faster, and persist longer. That is not to say that fraud fighting ecosystem is not evolving. Enterprises, regulators, governments, and vendors have all stepped up to the challenge. Vendors, especially today, are responding by continuously investing in R&D and deploying analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to power their FTP solutions. FTP is the acronym for fraud detection and prevention. Hello, everyone. I'm Deepali Sathe, Senior Industry Analyst in the Security Program at Frost & Sullivan, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm joined by experts who have deep experience in the cybersecurity industry. A very warm welcome to panelists and all the listeners. And let me just hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Eric Graham is the VP Product Management Application Security at Akamai. And Eric, would you like to get started?
Sure. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to chat with everyone today. Looking forward to the conversation. I've been with Akamai for quite a while, and for those that don't know us, we're frequently the system that all the users on the internet talk to before they talk to those critical applications that are out there where the fraud occurs, or that application that we're trying to protect. And because of that, we're entrusted with this amazing vantage point to try and help everyone sift between what's desired and undesired interactions in all the ways that's been evolving and morphing as the threats and as the fraud patterns change over time. And we try and use that big visibility to help everyone do it a little more confidently, a little faster, a little more effectively.
Okay, thank you. And we also have Hussein Bajwa. He is the Senior VP Product Risk Solutions at Sion.io. HP, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, so yeah, my name is Hussein Bajwa and I go by HB. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and work for Sion. Sion is a leader in fraud prevention technology. We look forward to one day being as well known as Akamai. Our background is in developer-centric fraud prevention, and we've expanded to build a platform that's able to address the needs across the board from, the smaller developer-centric environments all the way up to large enterprise. And we focus on data enrichment-centric solutions as well as transaction monitoring capabilities. And as we've been evolving, obviously the AI topic has been super important, as well as all of the capabilities of ML and hybrid decisioning. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Good, great. Thank you both. And it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. As part of Frost & Sullivan's identity security coverage, we've just concluded this year's edition of Fraud Detection and Prevention report, and I won't go deep into the findings, but I will use it as use it to set context for today's conversations. What you see here actually is a representation of where we are today in terms of fraud. The reality is a little more complex than this because there are diverse parameters, such as maturity of enterprises, strength of their tech and identity stack, and regulations, and other things that influence the evolution. On the left side is where you can see how different factors are making it easier for fraudsters to launch attacks and making those attacks much more potent. Fraudsters can find the weakest links in technology stacks of companies and understand human psychology and exploit it. They are not in a rush. They enter systems, they stay dormant, and they take their time to manipulate humans. The goal essentially is to maximize the effectiveness of the attack. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to select a few, the other one being newer venues. So digital customers, the fact that there's been an increase in digital customers just means a much larger landscape that fraudsters can exploit. It's across verticals. It's gone beyond just BFSI and healthcare. It's getting into gaming, payments, retail, education, marketplaces. Almost all verticals today face the consequences of an increase in fraud. And targeted attacks, right? I mean, just the very fact that fraudsters have resources at their disposal, they have time to test it out, they perfect their techniques, and it is becoming possible for them more and more to conduct research and launch very targeted attacks. On the right side, just a few, I've just included a few types of frauds that we've seen grow exponentially in the last few years. Unfortunately, fraud as a service, fraudsters are collaborating more and more. Deep fakes, I think that is one of those that has been one of the worst and the fastest growing. Social engineering, another one that exploits humans and their trust to gain access into confidential, personal and critical information. All of this, this is just the tip of the iceberg, of course. The intention is not to scare, but to allay your fears that, because we do have two people who understand this, and they can tell us how we can stay ahead of fraudsters, how we can power the fraud prevention, next-gen fraud prevention with AI and ML. And let's just get started. And let me begin today's conversation by asking Eric and HB about how AI and ML can essentially power the next-gen fraud, right? The first question, we could perhaps start with you, Eric, is how are AI and ML essentially contributing to improving fraud detection and prevention solutions? The top 2 or 3 ways that these technologies can be utilized to improve from where we are today.
Sure. So AI and ML are tools, right? I always start there. They're not the answer themselves. They're something you use to get to the answer. And in particular, they're incredibly helpful to help us all go faster, right? Get to an answer faster, to be more confident in what that answer is, be able to better explain the decision that's made. And if we look at cyber fraud, it's just a discipline, right? It's a continuous learning mission. I explained it to my mother as I'm in the business of building 10-foot walls. There are people that then build 11-foot ladders. We build a 12-foot wall. Somebody comes back with a 13-foot ladder. And that's the profession that we've entered into. And it's about how fast can you detect the need for the higher wall? How can you figure out what the new ladder looks like? How can you separate that from the interactions that you do want to have? And, AI and ML, I think it well understood. We can go through all the hyperbole together, but just amazing tools to help us find the clusters and the patterns and the outliers and the commonality to say, hey, this is something I recognize. This is something that's different. And if it's different, why is it different? And is it a different that's desired to me? And I think we all know that as consumers too. We've seen that just in the way interactions work in terms of like what experiences ask us to do with those captchas. Of course, we try and be invisible and not do that kind of thing, passively understand what's going on so we can actively make decisions. But AI and ML are tools to help us always pull in one more dimension, one more indicator, one more perspective to try and ask, is this something that's desired, suspicious, known to be malicious? What is this? And then, of course, help us explain that to everybody that needs to understand that. Because frequently knowing and doing are slightly disconnected, but AI can help connect those things.
Okay, HB, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Eric, and I enjoy thinking about these walls and ladders. It's definitely an interesting time for AI and ML. I think having been in network security, cybersecurity for quite some time, ML washing has probably been going on in the industry for about 10 years. And it started off with just having a really fancy way to describe regressions. And then the more recent sort of AI washing, it's driven by really amazing tools. And I think that there's sort of this worldview that you're either like obsessively fanatic about the transformation, or you're completely, resistant to change and are going to refuse to acknowledge the innovation. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. The ML methods in fraud detection haven't really changed in 15, 20 years. What's changed is the capability of the systems and the ability to rapidly understand a far greater surface of features at the same time. So we've gone from having very defensive and slow models to being able to be much faster to the point of being proactive. With that proactive activity, the challenge has been that the volume of alerts has increased. This is true not just in our space, but in every alert-based like intelligence space. And the solution at a superficial level always looks like AI. Like, I need a machine to solve for me this noisiness. And I think the reality is that the changes are happening quickly, but they're very lumpy. It's like a extremely precocious 10-year-old or 12-year-old. They sound great. They might even have a few great ideas, but to blanket assume that they're the same as a worldly person with a life of experience is probably irresponsible. You have to like look at the situation carefully and think about what the circumstances. I think that's the situation that we're running into now. And for the tools to not be this magical thing, I think we need to think about explainability, and we need to have reasonable hypotheses on like what we expect. And then we need to use our experience and intelligence, and slightly skeptically, but with an eye towards the optimistic future, kind of analyze this and figure out like what's the balance. Like, so right now it's a computer supporting a human decision and creating that like rapid acceleration, that 10x, 100x, 1000x speed up that Eric was mentioning. But like in future, could it be something like self-driving cars? Yeah. I mean, I live in Austin. We have Waymo around here. People often ask if it's scary to get in a Waymo. It's not, but it's got a millimeter wave LiDAR system that's created millimeter grade maps of the area of coverage that they drive in. It's a shockingly good system, but it's very limited. You can't get outside of its like coverage zone. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to figure out is like in this fraud space, in our space, like what does it look like to fence it in?
Okay, that's interesting to hear. I think the ladder in the wall, I think most people are going to remember that. As long as people are looking at the wall and building big ladders, that's good, and not closing eyes, looking at a future where, like you said, we have to be cautiously optimistic. I'm going to take a step back here. We've discussed the contribution, of course, that AI and ML have the potential to make. But enterprises also have a lot of concerns, right? And one of them probably is that The reliance on AI and ML also means storing and processing data, which is strongly regulated in some parts of the world. And complicating this further, there are some, of course, who already have some regulations in place, but the regulating of AI technology, how big do you think the concern is that, as they arise, as the regulations come up, what would be your advice to organizations in terms of how they should plan and how they should evolve when it comes to their fraud detection and prevention solutions? HP, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I think the problem set is relatively consistent and has been present as long as we've had computer-assisted decisions, that you want to focus on data minimization strategies so that you're being as privacy sensitive as possible. You want to avoid obvious sources of bias, which becomes much harder the more opaque your models and decisioning frameworks become. And the counter to that is always going to be more explainability and visibility. And I think that when you look at these frameworks, you have to make choices on like which groups are doing the best work. I think in this world, it's always useful to focus on the minimum viable compliance, the minimum viable regulatory friction, but it's important to not ignore it. I think that when you look at initiatives like ISO 42000 and stuff, there's trustworthy AI frameworks that people are building that if you simply accommodate and consider one of them and deeply think about the promises of that framework as it sort of evolves over the next 3 or 4 years, you can implement something that's similar to like the security by design constructs that are transforming like cybersecurity and internet infrastructure. The security by design has really been a transformative thing in that space. And I think compliance by design is going to be pivotal to cloud-based frameworks that are powered by AI and having consistent explainability that global regulators don't have to tag you on periodically. You don't have to have NYDFS acting as everyone's sort of like conscience, periodically fining people just to make an example, regardless of whether they make obvious sense to be covered by them. That kind of stuff, I think it's important for us to sort of think about it in that compliance by design kind of framework.
Eric?
Very much agree with that sentiment of be intentful, right? When we talk about the use of AI and ML, fundamentally what we're talking about is there's a large pile of data somewhere and we're trying to get insights out of it. So it all starts with, data privacy, responsible data stewardship. What are we doing there? And there's a tension in all of this of, well, it might be helpful if I also had, these other things to help me answer tomorrow's questions that aren't quite here yet. So there's this inherent tension of, I want to have all the information. I want to have all the data, because then I want to use my AI ML tools to ask questions of it. And the questions might be different tomorrow, and I might need different things tomorrow. But all of it, I believe, starts with just responsible stewardship and collection of the data and making sure that there's some intent in what it is that you're gathering and why, and making sure that you're caring for that appropriately. Because the model's really just going to amplify whatever you put in there, right? So if you're being irresponsible with what you collect, the model's likely going to be irresponsible with what it detects, right? And I always go to just those inputs as the first thing to be mindful of. The other is for getting use in real world applications. I'd look to try and follow the paved roads to that Waymo example, like use the defined limits that exist there. A lot of us in the industry that work hard to create commercial solutions work hard to be compliant with all the regimes that are out there. I can tell you, I used to have a lot more hair. Part of the reason why I don't is just the compliance of what it is we need to do to be responsible throughout the globe. And that's changing quite a bit and fracturing and evolving. And that too is speeding up. So leverage that. That's a real benefit that solutions can provide and also help make explainable, rather than trying to build your own data lakes, your own data collection, your own AI, ML infrastructure, demonstrate compliance of it. Like it is a non-trivial but important responsibility.
Yeah. And I think a lot still needs to get done when it comes to educating enterprises about how and where the data is, or how it's going to be used, and AI explainability, as you said, because there is still some resistance about sharing of that data. We've built a decent enough background and kind of can move forward to the actual, really, the topic that we are discussing today. Another kind of frequent topic of discussion is how cyber criminals today are leveraging AI. And they have the most sophisticated kind of frauds out there. They continuously evolve their methods, trying to outpace what organizations have finally managed to put in terms of defense. Could you share with us your thoughts on, how AI and ML can actually prevent these kind of frauds as well, the really sophisticated ones? And yeah, you're welcome to add your anecdotes or your experience in terms of how what you've seen. Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. We could probably do an 8-hour webinar on this topic itself. It's fascinating out there, right? The incentives for the adversaries are lucrative, right? It's typically somebody that has a financial incentive at the end, and they'll keep innovating until they find success. So I'd say the macro thing we see is the quantity of activity is up. If we just go to looking at automated traffic across the internet, which is typically how people try to perpetrate fraud and abuse at scale, our typical customer saw something like 80% increase year over year in just the volume of automated abuse coming into the sites. So the overall just volume to understand and respond to is going up. And when we start peeling that with our threat research teams and looking at what's going on in there, we typically see things like the more sophisticated adversaries are getting better at finding limits, right? They've always been good at, okay, you only allow 10 applications from this particular source, so I'm going to send 9 before I pop up somewhere else, right? And that's just a very simple example. But that limit testing, we see that getting much more sophisticated, and that's tooling against us, right? That's somebody looking and trying to figure out, like, when do I get the unexpected response? We see things like fuzzing, enumeration, all of those kind of pattern attacks. They're getting larger, they're getting more sophisticated, they're getting more distributed, they're getting obfuscated in more permutations, but it's like an exponential just increase in the challenges and permutations that come in. But fundamentally, the tactics are the same. The tools being used to amplify the train of thought, and that's creating larger volume. But the methods and the abuse itself, they're familiar patterns when you get down to first principles.
Okay. HV, want to take that?
Yeah, no, I agree with Eric that the challenge is the volume, velocity, and adaptation quality that's happening here. What we're seeing is that fraud has always been a really tricky problem, and it's been treated as kind of a separate silo because it's been traditionally thought of as an unbalanced problem, which it is. It's a needle in a haystack problem, and sometimes it's even harder than that to sort of imagine how to evaluate. Trying to get rid of the noise is trying to get rid of all of the good transactions and keep the bad transactions. It's a little bit of a difficult thing to wrap your mind around. And at the same time, we've got these adversaries whose toolkits are expanding and improving constantly. And they don't have the legacy history of 5 years of organizational history, building out silos and building out these sort of, one's got an 8-foot wall for this problem and one's got the 12-foot wall for another problem. And another person might have a 40-foot wall for a different problem. And these guys are just looking for lowest available wall. And they're able to find their way into these environments. So I think the speed of the adversary requires us to start thinking in terms of tool consolidation and bringing together our orchestration in defense in the same ways that they are. That, we can't think about batching operations and streaming operations separately. We can't think about transaction fraud apart from onboarding or registration or login fraud. We need to start seeing these things as the whole picture, because that's the whole picture that the adversary is attacking. And their tool set is expanding to where the script kiddie type of attacker is now more powerful than they've ever been. And this is an ongoing challenge. Like, we need to respond by building tools that can adapt in minutes and hours, not weeks and months, with an enormous number of approval flows for every single minor change that we need. And so I think that we need to look at stuff that's lowest common denominator and high value against AI threats. The best defense against AI threats is a history that's immune to anything but time travelers. So if you have like a digital footprint, if you have a history of a user, you have something extremely valuable. Once you've gotten the history that's available via the public sources or federated data and consortiums, I think the next step is building that behavioral and intent-based model, right? Like, you want to see what people are trying to do. You want to extract intent from seemingly random actions and look for good activity baselining as well. We've been so focused on bad activity baselining that we sometimes forget that the good activity baselining is just as important. That's how we're going to identify what that good activity noise looks like. And so I think we have a really good opportunity to look at that, expand our visibility into that, move from instance-oriented behavioral evaluation to entire session-based evaluation, and then leverage the tools to see commonality. These people operate in networks, they operate in groups, whether formally organized or informally organized. Being able to detect those patterns with new graph techniques. I think too many people have been disappointed by graph techniques and visualizations lately. They feel like network analysis had great promise, but it's been overpromised, and it actually just creates a noisy graph that looks impressive but doesn't give me any real insight. I think we need to start thinking about those visualizations and stop focusing on making it an impressive array of lights and controls, and think about how to improve the actionability. We want to create visuals that allow people to see the patterns that are difficult in terms of connections. And so we need to keep focus on the fact that these are important tools, and that just because we did them poorly for a while doesn't mean that we're going to keep doing them poorly in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. And actually, another challenge that kind of keeps coming up during discussions is that enterprises, especially when it comes to consumer fraud, right, they are especially worried about balancing security and user experience. Now, since we're talking about improving, and you mentioned about how looking at good cases is equally important, knowing them is equally important. How do you suggest, or how do you think are today's solutions equipped to help companies balance the two? And and the two, balance both security or fraud prevention and the user experience as well. HB, you want to take that first?
Sure. So I think that what's important in this conversation about security and complexity and user experience is that friction should be and is configurable. The question is like where you're doing it. And the most important thing here is that, are you asking the right questions? This is one of those areas where, old school like thinking models, like, asking 5 whys kind of things helps. Because if you can trace back not the what you want to do and kind of be so action oriented that you haven't spent the time sort of filtering through that like natural observe, orient, decide and act kind of framework, you want to pull back and think about the thing at 10,000 feet. You want to think about what is the overall landscape that I'm seeing, and then orient yourself towards the problems that you genuinely want to tackle. So, for example, people have been spending a lot of time worrying about decline rates, and they focus too much on making the metric the decline rate itself. And then, of course, once you make the metric the objective, then it sort of starts to degrade the whole chain of discussion. What you really want to do is you want to make informed and intentional decisions that, like, hey, the reality is that it's expensive for me to acquire customers. So I need to reduce that friction, but I also need to prevent enormous growth in my breakage costs, my fraud-related costs, because when I start excusing enormous amounts of that as just the cost of doing business, it limits my ability to make customer acquisition an intelligent choice filled with like the best possible bonuses and value props to those new legitimate customers. So from a competitive advantage standpoint, I think the world is starting to become uh, very focused on this, that if you allow fraud to, if you continue to just sort of believe that fraud can just keep increasing, that's not acceptable. But also being overly restrictive doesn't work. So I think every business needs to start making more intentional decisions, and instead of just focusing really far down the decision chain, sort of start thinking about it in terms of that entire customer acquisition cost. Don't think of it just as the losses and cost of doing business, but like think about the opportunities that are opened up by potentially revamping your entire solution, thinking about bringing this together into a single intelligence framework that can easily and in a modern way be integrated to your CRMs, to your ERPs, to your third-party logistics systems, to any support systems that you have. And so I think this is the opportunity, and we need to sort of think about the configuration that we want for like risk-based authentication, risk-based profiling. We need to start thinking about this fraud and risk platform space as a space where you're doing progressive profiling, the same way that Segment and Twilio transformed customer data platforms by sort of giving you the ability to, I just want to give my name right now. I just want to give my email now. Okay, I guess now I'll give you my phone number. That gradual building process was really valuable to them being able to create like a unified view. I think we need to do the same thing in fraud and AML and a lot of these areas that fall under the risk and compliance bucket as opposed to like security and customer acquisition today.
Eric, you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, so a lot of things I agree with in there. And just to kind of expand and decorate a little bit, earlier we said this is a continuous learning exercise, but I think HB is just hitting the other side of that. It's also a continuous optimization exercise, and you have to really focus on like, what are you optimizing to? And I think we've seen lots of examples in the past of, well, you have a fraud team over here and they're optimizing to prevent losses. You have a security team over here and they're optimizing to prevent, risk being realized. You have a marketing team over here and they're optimizing to signups. Okay, so what are we trying to optimize to with this interaction that we're exposing out to the world? And well, the webinar here is to talk about AI and ML. Like fundamentally, there's like a mental shift, a collaborative shift of just how do we think about the discipline that all those different perspectives have to come to, of like, what are we trying to enable here? And then what is the optimum? And then we can use all that AI and ML and all those rich perspectives to try and say, how are we doing? And to the point of friction's configurable, do we need to dial it up or dial it down? And where are we in that journey? And what I'd say is this is one of those disciplines that's quickly become a team sport, but I'm not sure everybody knows they're on the team, right? And there's all these different vantage points of like what's happening in those user journeys and how you progressively profile and learn as they're unfolding and the different points of control and choice points and decisions as they go through it. And there's real technology challenges to get those all stitched together, like HB was just mentioning. But there's a lot of just cultural awareness, decisioning, like alignment of goal that is where the real game changer occurs. And so something that was said a few minutes ago, just getting to that mentality of like being able to recognize returning good users, right? Profiling good users. Like that's something that I think the security background, the fraud background, like it was very slow for that cohort to get to, right? But when a marketer enters the conversation, like it's the first thing they go to. So like when you get everybody together, I think something meaningfully different happens across that user journey of like, what are we trying to optimize to? And yeah, I can recognize returning good users. I can get friction out. I can see a risk indicator here, but decide that I'm not concerned about that risk until they get to step 7. And, let it ride until step 7, and maybe we'll be smarter by then. But all those patterns start with knowing what you're solving for. Like, what are you optimizing to?
Yeah, not at all friction is bad, of course, and which brings me to one of my favorite questions. Are there any emerging AI and ML powered possibilities that hold a lot of promise and have you excited? Eric, you want to go first?
Just back to it's a team sport and not everybody knows they're on the team. They might not even know what game they're playing. I really like when GenAI is deployed thoughtfully to be explainable, to make it approachable, to be able to understand like what is going on. So what are the decisions that we need to go through out there? And just like we're in a kind of world of, we have a ton of data typically. We have very few insights, right? And bridging those is, of course, the magic of AI ML done well, but communicating that and making that actionable is the other side of it. So just how do you find the needle in the haystack that was mentioned earlier when the haystack's doubling, all the time? I think we're getting better and better and better every day, finding the needles and explaining why they matter. But you need to know what it is you're optimizing to, and you need to know who you're trying to explain to and like what they care about. So I think that's a big part. The other side, if we're talking about AI, is just when consumers really take off with agentic AI and they start saying, you know what, I'm choosing to make this agent an authorized delegate of me, and it's going to go and transact with these companies out there. I am very interested into what we're all going to do in that reality. Like as a business, do I want that? As a fraud fighter, like what's that do? I think we've seen previews of this in other industries. But just that one to me is the like fascinating on the horizon and maybe coming faster than we all expect.
Yeah. HB, you want to add to that? I'm glad you brought up GenAI and Agentic AI. Those are like the words that we've just been hearing so much more in the last 6 months, probably, not, and it's just exploding almost. So yeah, take it away, HB.
Yeah, so to Eric's point, like I think these are all the really exciting spaces that exist. You know, the speed at which things are changing is pretty amazing. Uh, I'm a huge fan of network analysis. Barabasi's work on the space has been fascinating to me for 20 plus years. And I think that the fact that we're able to realize these tools so easily now is really fascinating. A year ago, most of my work was on narrative explanations and being able to help scenarios where a complex amount of data was being aggregated quickly, revealing an unusual pattern, but it wasn't clear why it was unusual and why it mattered. And the AI was able to do that really well. And then the world changed in a way that I truly did not expect with Claude 4. With Claude's Sonnet release. I was really startled. 3.7. The model is so good at software engineering. It solves some problems in sort of innovative and perfect ways that I really had to start thinking about the scenario differently. And that's caused this like latest explosion in agentic AI, is that like these solutions like Gemini's 2.5 Pro model and the Claude Sonnet stuff, they're so good at this particular problem set that they've really tackled it and accelerated, and they've shown us a glimpse into what other industries look like 5 or 6 years into the future, I think. And here, what we see is that what used to be single prompt, single response, single prompt, single response, and the cost of doing these activities was so expensive that, you know, going in, spending a penny for each time you were going to get like maybe a 20% valuable response. There was this hesitation to use it to amplify. And what's happened with agentic AI is that one prompt can effectively trigger and support another 120 automated prompts and support, you know, a network of agentic activity off of it. Until I saw solutions like Manus and H2O and ChatGPT Operator and Claude Computer Use start taking advantage of these things, I was a bit of a Luddite. I suddenly became the old guy that I used to worry about and be annoyed by 15, 20 years ago. I realized that like I was the guy going, oh, it's not there. It's not a big deal. But it actually is a big deal. Like if you haven't played with the Bolt for the Bolt.news of the world, the Lovables of the world, the Vercels, the Base 44s, these things give you a glimpse into the future. And for each person, it's going to create a different mental model. That idea of that precocious, like, you know, teenager or whatever that like seems to know it all, there are things that they know. And it is valuable to know what things they know. So, like, I found it really useful to spend time looking at these tools and evaluating them in the context of the few things that I do have expertise in. And I think most of the experts and like sort of experienced professionals on this call probably have the same ability, that you can upload your own sort of experiences where you know something to be true that other people have generally gotten wrong, that if you evaluate it and see whether the AI is able to get it right, it gives you a different context into what the sophistication level of the AI is. It'll get some things wrong, but you'll start to like adapt your picture of what this capability is in the future. And I think that people who haven't, even non-coders, especially non-coders, people who just have an eye for the opportunity that lies in optimizing almost anything around them, they need to get into these tools. Like it's important that people play around with uh, no code development, not just no code development tools, but like these prompt-based AI prompt-based development tools, and understand what's possible with agentic AI and sort of chained operations of these AIs. And then I think we can all sort of come to a better idea of what the degree of supervision is needed on this learning, what supervision level is needed on the inference that's happening as a result. And we can lean into the acceleration, like what maybe you imagined was 10x acceleration. I think if you look at some of these tools, you can see how it's possible to get much more than that. You can get 1,000x acceleration. This is like an amazing moment for like human potential. Like, I think if you just have a view that like what I've done in the past isn't a reflection of what I can do in the future, you open yourself up, you open up your organizations, you open up the future. And I think this is really, really important. I think I hope that others don't ignore these tools the way that I initially did.
It's interesting to know. It was like, you guys were just warming up, and the tech spirit just came out in this last question. I'd like to thank both the panelists. It was a fabulous conversation. Any thoughts, HB and Eric, in terms of something that we might not have touched upon and you think is an important part that should have come up during the conversation today? Do you want to add a few comments for that?
Sure. So I think one of the things we're asked a lot is just with all the enthusiasm or skepticism and everything in between for AI and ML, right? Like, how do you decide what to use? Like, if I'm out looking at solutions and the AI washing's occurring out there in the industry, as mentioned earlier, like, how do I know, right? And I get asked this question a fair amount, so I thought it'd just be interesting to roll around in for a second. And I go back to all these things are only as smart as what you put in, right? So what's the fundamental input, like insight engine, that is going into all of these tools? And then I look for what am I actually trying to achieve? Because fundamentally, AI and ML, like, they're tools, they're amazing tools. Like the analogy that we've used many times is, we used to be in the age of hammers. ML got everybody automatic nail guns. And now, like, I don't even know how to describe what we're looking at, but it can put a lot of boards together really fast. But it's about, what are you trying to build? Like, what's the outcome? Like, as we all get ever more enamored with the mechanism, don't lose sight of the objective. What are we trying to do? And that's guidance we have to get back to our own teams that are building, to our customers that are evaluating, to people that are seeking kind of guidance of just, wow, in this crazy AI ML reality, like, how do I navigate it? It's like, well, let's not forget what we're trying to achieve. What are we trying to do?
Okay, HB, you have some.
That's just such a great point, because just this morning and like virtually every week, I'm having conversations with engineers and they're asking me, do I have to solve this using AI even if it's suboptimal? And my point is always to them, no, absolutely not. And this is like where I think the AI washing is most like pernicious, is that people get so fixated, as Eric is saying, on the tool and the technology and the details. And like, don't get me wrong, like, I love the technology. Like, I'll sit there and talk about the differences of a locally deployed model versus like a frontier model until people are exhausted and explaining to me that they have no interest in this. But like, the reality is that you need to, that this is where the opportunity exists for people who are somewhere in the middle. Domain expertise. Sometimes people with domain expertise are afraid of these tools. I think they need to lean into it. They need to spend time trying to get comfortable with it. It will take less time than you think. And having a pessimistic or skeptical view is not necessary. I think you try and learn it, you try and evaluate it. It's not going to be perfect, but you'll understand it really well. And you'll be focused on solving for fraud challenges, for compliance challenges, for outcomes that matter instead of overfitting for the tool. And I think this is the really big opportunity for experienced executives, experienced professionals. We need to connect these two things. Like, we need to eliminate this like historic computational world of like, well, IT takes care of that. The whole world is shifting into like this operations technology transformation with AI. Everyone is empowered. And so you shouldn't think about computing as separate from you. Computability is part of your toolkit, whether or not you realize it. And we just need to become more comfortable with it and less afraid of looking unfamiliar or too novice in the interim. Like once you learn it, you'll feel better about it.
Thank you. And that was really good and good points raised actually. Eric and HB, pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can have you back for more interesting conversations in the future.